Imagine a world without a single wire, without a glowing bulb, without the hum of a motor. At first glance, it might sound primitive, even lifeless. But in reality, medieval society was anything but powerless. People of the Middle Ages looked at nature not as an obstacle, but as an endless toolbox. They learned to bend rivers into engines, to trap the invisible strength of the wind, to measure time with shadows and dripping water, and to cool their harvests with nothing more than stone, earth, and clever design. What makes these inventions extraordinary is not only that they worked without electricity, but that they became the backbone of entire civilizations. Villages grew into towns, towns into cities, because these technologies amplified human muscle thousands of times over. The watermill turned a farmer's grain into flour for an entire region. The windmill pumped life into arid lands. Mechanical presses multiplied the written word faster than scribes ever could. Today, surrounded by smartphones, satellites, and AI, we often forget that medieval innovations were not backward. They were ingenious, efficient, and above all, sustainable. They ran on what the land and sky naturally provided. In many ways, they were more eco-friendly than what we use today. So let's travel back in time, to an age without electricity but full of engineering marvels. Let's uncover the forgotten technologies that shaped history, powered kingdoms, and still inspire us in the era of renewable energy. 1. Watermills, harnessing the rhythm of rivers. Long before steam engines or hydroelectric dams, the simple watermill was the beating heart of medieval production. At its core, a watermill is deceptively simple. A river's current pushes against a large wooden wheel, the wheel turns, and through a system of shafts and gears, that rotation is transferred to machinery inside a mill. But the impact of this invention was nothing short of revolutionary. How it worked? There were several designs depending on geography and water flow. An undershot wheel worked in shallow streams, with water flowing beneath the paddles. An overshot wheel required higher ground, where water poured from above, using gravity as extra force. Some regions built breastshoot wheels, where water struck the wheel at mid-height for balanced efficiency. Each design represented deep knowledge of hydraulics and local environment. Once the wheel turned, millstones rotated, grain cracked and ground, and flour poured out in quantities unimaginable with hand labor. What it was used for? Most people associate watermills with flour, and that was indeed their most vital role. A single mill could feed thousands, reducing famine risk and stabilizing food supplies, but water power went far beyond bread. Mills cut timber into planks, crushed ore in mining regions, hammered cloth in textile workshops, and even pressed all from seeds. In essence, wherever rotation was needed, the watermill became the first renewable engine. Why it mattered. To grasp its importance, imagine a medieval farmer grinding grain by hand. It could take hours to prepare enough flour for one family. Now, place that same farmer in a village with a watermill. Suddenly, an entire community's harvest could be processed in days. Labor was freed for other tasks, fueling new crafts, markets, and trade networks. Entire towns formed around mills because they guaranteed food security and economic activity. The social hub. A watermill wasn't just a machine, it was a gathering place. Farmers queued with sacks of grain, gossip was exchanged, deals were struck. The rhythmic turning of the wheel became the soundtrack of daily life. Millers often held a respected yet sometimes mistrusted position. They literally controlled the bread of the people. The legacy. Watermills marked the dawn of mechanized labor. They bridged the gap between human muscle and modern industry. The same principles of transferring energy through gears and shafts laid the foundation for machines centuries later. In many ways, the medieval watermill was the prototype of the modern factory, silent, tireless, and powered by nature itself. Even today, when we look at hydroelectric dams generating gigawatts of energy, we are looking at the descendant of that humble wooden wheel turning in a medieval stream. Second chapter, the hidden symbolism of clay in medieval life. When we think about clay in medieval times, the first image that often comes to mind is pottery jugs, plates, and bowls used in everyday life. But the reality of clay's role was far deeper and far more symbolic than simple household items. Clay was not just a material. It was a reflection of the natural cycle of life, a connection to the earth, and a symbol of transformation that was deeply embedded in the medieval worldview. In medieval Europe, clay was associated with creation and rebirth. The church often drew parallels between clay and the biblical story of Genesis, where God shaped humanity from the dust of the earth. This connection elevated clay from a mere resource to something sacred, a reminder that all life is molded, shaped, and eventually returns to the ground. Potters and builders, therefore, weren't just workers. They were seen as participants in a divine process of creation, turning earth into something both useful and lasting. Beyond religion, clay also held a cultural symbolism that shaped how people interacted with their world. For instance, clay ovens were often built at the heart of a home, serving as both a literal and symbolic source of warmth and sustenance. These ovens were not just places to cook bread. They were the hearth of family life, the place where survival met tradition. In many regions, women were responsible for maintaining these clay structures, and their role became a bridge between daily survival and cultural continuity. Clay was also tied to ideas of permanence and impermanence. A clay jug could shatter easily, reminding people of life's fragility, but bricks made from clay could last for centuries, forming castles and cathedrals that symbolized strength and endurance. This duality fascinated medieval thinkers and was often reflected in art, literature, and philosophy of the time. To them, clay was a paradox. It could be fragile, yet eternal, common, yet sacred. Understanding the symbolic role of clay helps us see medieval society through a different lens. It wasn't just about practicality, it was about meaning. Every clay pot, every oven, every brick carried with it a weight of symbolism that told people who they were and what they believed in. In many ways, clay shaped not only their homes but their worldview. The clay cooling chambers, beating the heat with ancient engineering. When we imagine medieval life, we often picture castles, knights, and candlelit feasts. But behind those scenes, there existed an everyday struggle that was just as important for survival as warfare or politics: the battle against heat. How did medieval people, living without electricity, manage to keep their food fresh, their drinks cool, and their environment livable? The answer lies in a revolutionary system of clay-based cooling chambers, a technology that feels almost futuristic in its efficiency. At the heart of this system was the principle of evaporative cooling, a phenomenon where water, when allowed to evaporate slowly through a porous surface, absorbs heat from its surroundings. Medieval craftsmen harnessed this natural process by building clay structures with carefully controlled porosity. These chambers were not just jars or pots, they were entire systems, often built into homes, markets, or storage spaces, that could maintain temperatures up to 21 degrees Celsius lower than the surrounding air. Imagine living in the middle of summer, with the scorching sun outside, yet stepping into a cool chamber that preserved grains, fruits, and even dairy as if nature itself had given you a refrigerator centuries before the modern world invented one. The design was deceptively simple. Layers of clay, sand, and sometimes straw were combined to create walls that breathed. As water seeped through these walls, the continuous cycle of evaporation produced a cooling effect. This wasn't just about food storage, it was a matter of survival. Communities relied on these chambers to protect their harvests, prevent spoilage, and ensure that essential goods could be traded even across long distances without rotting. In regions where climate extremes defined daily life, these clay cooling systems represented a profound adaptation to nature's challenges. But the brilliance of these structures wasn't only functional, it was also cultural. They became part of the architectural identity of medieval towns and villages. Some cooling chambers were intricately decorated, their exteriors painted with lime or carved with patterns that reflected local traditions. What's more, their placement within communities often determined the rhythms of trade and social life. Merchants would gather around these clay-cooled spaces, exchanging goods that had been kept safe from decay. Farmers would bring their produce here, ensuring that the fruits of their labor could feed not just their own families but entire marketplaces. And here lies the most astonishing part. Even today, researchers and eco-architects are studying these medieval clay cooling systems to develop modern alternatives to energy-hungry air conditioners and refrigerators. In an age where climate change challenges us to rethink how we consume energy, these ancient chambers whisper a powerful lesson. Sometimes, the best solutions are already beneath our feet, waiting to be rediscovered. Chapter 3. The Secret Language of Clay. Symbols, Rituals, and Beliefs. Clay was not just a building material. It was a sacred language, a silent witness to the unseen bond between humans and the divine. In many medieval communities, the act of shaping clay was considered an act of creation that mirrored the work of God or the gods they worshipped. Each vessel, each tile, each carved pattern carried more than functionality, it carried meaning. Archaeological findings show us that clay objects often held protective symbols: circles for eternity, spirals for cycles of life, crosses and intersecting lines for harmony between earth and heaven. These markings were not decoration for the sake of beauty. They were prayers baked into the clay, permanent once the fire of the kiln touched them. Every household pot or storage jar might carry a blessing for fertility, health, or protection against evil spirits. Rituals of clay making were common. In some regions, clay was mixed with sacred herbs or blessed water before shaping, making the material itself an extension of ritual purity. Firing the clay became a metaphor for the human soul's trial, facing the flames of life and emerging stronger, purified, and eternal. Medieval potters and builders were not simply craftsmen. They were cultural translators who connected the material world with the spiritual. Even bricks used in castles and monasteries sometimes bore hidden marks of masons and artisans, small imprints meant to consecrate the structure or mark their labor with divine protection. Clay thus became more than earth. It became a record of faith, a physical expression of hope, and a symbolic defense against the invisible dangers of medieval life. Through these rituals and symbols, clay was elevated beyond utility. It became an immortal storyteller, carrying the silent voices of a people who believed that every vessel and every wall could carry their prayers into eternity. Chapter 4: From Clay to Carriages, the Surprising Journey of Transportation. Transportation is one of humanity's greatest achievements, and it has gone through transformations so astonishing that they seem almost unbelievable. From the earliest clay-built pathways that guided the steps of barefoot travelers to the invention of the wheel and, eventually, the creation of horse-drawn carriages, this journey of movement reflects not just practicality but also ambition and ingenuity. Imagine a world where the road beneath your feet was not a smooth highway, but carefully crafted clay hardened under the sun. These surfaces, though primitive by modern standards, were marvels of engineering in their time. They represented the first attempts of humankind to tame the unpredictable terrain of nature, offering a more reliable way to travel between villages, trade routes, and early civilizations. But the real revolution came with the invention of the wheel, an idea so simple yet so powerful that it forever altered the pace of human progress. At first, wheels were carved from stone or crafted with wood, materials that connected directly to the natural world around us. They were not simply tools of transportation. They were symbols of human imagination, transforming the way people thought about distance and speed. The wheel turned the impossible into the achievable. As society advanced, so did the vehicles that carried its people and goods. The horse-drawn carriage became a masterpiece of both craftsmanship and utility. Covered in fine woodwork, often decorated with ornate details, these carriages symbolized status and mobility. Yet beyond the elegance, they served a much deeper purpose, connecting faraway communities, enabling trade across vast distances, and even changing the way wars were fought. Roads were improved, cities expanded, and the horizon of possibility stretched wider than ever before. This chapter also reveals how clay never truly disappeared from the narrative of transportation. The very bricks and roads that guided these carriages were shaped from the same earth that had once formed the first primitive pathways. Clay became the foundation of the roads, bridges, and even the infrastructure that made large-scale transportation possible. Without clay's contribution, the sleek movement of carriages and the expansion of empires might have been delayed by centuries. What is fascinating is how this evolution was not merely technical but also cultural. The wheel and carriage brought people together, inspired trade, fueled exploration, and set the stage for the birth of modern travel. Without this key leap, the future development of trains, automobiles, and airplanes would never have been conceivable. The clay pathway, the wooden wheel, and the carriage are not just artifacts of history, they are stepping stones in the grand narrative of human determination to conquer distance. In reflecting on this journey, one cannot help but see the symbolism. Clay represents our humble beginnings, the wheel represents our ingenuity, and the carriage represents our ambition to go further than ever before. Each of these innovations, born from necessity, carried within them the seeds of revolution. And though today's highways and high-speed trains may look like miracles of modern engineering, they are, in truth, the direct descendants of those early clay roads and wooden wheels.